Awesome. Thank you, Anil, especially for specifying my origin. Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Fowler. I'm delighted to be here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Transmute. We are indeed headquartered in Austin, Texas, where we have been under contract with Department of Homeland Security's SVIP program, Anil, and U.S. Customs, so Sam's team, for the last 5 years, working to deploy digitally verifiable credentials in the import-export process. So really quickly, I want to take a step back and talk about the multi-billion-dollar paper problem in the supply chain, which is really what Transmute has set out to address. Most people aren't aware that still fewer than 1% of trade documents involved in import-export and the associated workflows are fully digital, even though paperless trade promises to add over $75 billion annually in trade volumes to the US alone. Of course, there's technologies, and COVID drove everyone to focus on this, but many of these technologies we're all familiar with: Excel, ERP systems, PDFs, EDI, and really they've reinforced the data silos that the paper world initiated. This is where Transmute comes in. We exist to bridge the data silos across the supply chain by transmuting all these different data formats into something called verifiable credentials. You've probably heard of this technology under other terms in other regions: digital twins, product passports. I'm going to use them synonymously here. One step further out in terms of the bird's eye view. Why has nobody addressed this today? We know it's a tremendous problem and it's incredibly costly. Really, it has to do with aligning interests at ports. There's 3 main charges that CBP and government have to contend with at any port of entry: fast facilitation or efficient facilitation of goods, targeted enforcement. Let's not let violative goods, things like fentanyl, come in our borders and harm our American consumers, and revenue collection. Historically, and in the manual-based paper status quo, these things are in conflict. If we want to get really good at enforcement, take a look at my home state, we can look for the fentanyl in the haystack manually, but we're going to stall ports of entry. We're going to clog them up, and we're going to reroute our tax dollars to other ports and have our commercial businesses lose out revenue altogether. Transmute, for the first time in history, is deploying technology that can positively impact all 3 critical areas, or three dimensions of cross-border trade at the same time. We're doing that through our product called the Verifiable Data Platform. This is an enterprise SaaS solution built on top of open technology standards that we've developed under contract with US Customs and DHS over the last 5 years. There should be an animation playing, but what you would see if there was is that we have thank you, Anil. A very simple interface that allows any business of any shape and size, whether they're using paper, PDFs, or ERP systems, to plug into our API or use our web application to drag and drop information and transmute all those different data formats into this digital twin or digitally verifiable credential format. This eliminates the need for paper. It solves the source of data or the data provenance problem, which many trade facilitation and enforcement decisions are premised on. It allows our customers to automatically comply with emerging regulation and digitization initiatives, not just coming out of US Customs, but also places like Canada, the UK, or even the EU's digital product passport initiatives. And not only does it streamline compliance, it streamlines operations immensely. In fact, we found since our commercial launch last year, for buyers within the supply chain, folks like customs brokers and freight forwarders, we're able to immediately cut data administration costs by up to 90%. No more copies, but also no more manual data reconciliation, no more manual formatting of this information, and our customers can focus on capturing the more than 20% of revenue that is found as a result. The mic drop moment is really that these verifiable credentials don't just solve for data provenance, they're also semantically rich and semantically aware. We use linked data such that all of our credentials are automatically machine readable, any sort of ambiguity is reconciled, and a real-time dynamic map of the supply chain is available to all of our customers that's easy for business users to search and query. And everyone needs an AI story, and the fact of the matter is the output of those models is only as reliable as the input. And if your data is structured in this format, you can expect up to 3 times more reliable or actionable outcomes. Again, we've been under contract for the last 5 years. I'm proud to say we secured our phase 5 late last year, with the successful red teaming and test of our technology for import of steel with US Customs last year, and we're on deck to do the same thing this year for e-commerce imports, starting with Type 86 pesticide imports and 321 imports of various brand textiles and clothing goods. We're in market today, largely powering customers in the Mexico to US trading routes, our biggest trading ally to date. But we have a global team and, again, support customers globally as well. So I'll ask you to join us in transmuting trade together, and I defer to the sharks.
My first question was, when you talk about removing the paper, increasing, I don't think it's small enough. This better? Okay. You spoke about how removing paper increased volume through the ports. How is it that removing the paper actually increases the volume of goods, physical goods moving through the port?
So on average, so this is really a question I think about throughput in general. On average today, we know that a single shipment takes up to 50 pieces of paper and copies exchanged by up to 30 different actors. Using digitally verifiable credentials, not only are you eliminating copies so that you're sharing the original signed, cryptographically signed data across your supply chain in real time, but on top of that, you have an opportunity to actually send data in earlier. This maps to some of US Customs 21st Century Customs modernization framework, in which they're not just interested in digital information at the time of entry, but they want to be able to receive machine-readable information much earlier in the process to enable things like pre-facilitation or pre-arrival facilitative or enforcement capabilities. I like to think of this as kind of the TSA pre-check, if you will, but for cross-border trade.
Okay, but my question is really, so I understand that the whole transaction can happen faster and that both sides of the transaction will realize efficiencies as a result of not having to handle all that paper. But how does that actually physically move the goods more quickly through the port? So like, are we backlogged at the ports as a consequence of the paperwork?
Yes, absolutely. So let's take, for instance, the Mexico to Texas ports of entry. We're talking about land crossings here, and on average, you'll often receive data in order to process the land border crossing within about 2 hours of that shipment. So what we know largely from McKinsey market data with regards to the stat I'm about to say is that if we could speed up that process by 10 minutes, we would be able to add over $325 million in trade happening annually at those ports of entry or in that region every year. So it is about kind of relieving bottlenecks, but also having more pre-arrival capabilities to prevent the bottlenecks to begin with.
All right, so we heard you focus on physical commodities like steel and pesticides. This morning we heard a lot about supply chain for software, and I would imagine there's a lot of products that contain both physical elements and software, and I see a lot of similarities on the sort of management side of things. Have you looked at what's being done in the SBOM software world and how, what you could use there and how there are similarities?
Absolutely. On that note, we see a lot of similarities, and we increasingly see a need for software and hardware interaction in different aspects of the supply chain. Maybe it's cold chain or using other types of sensors that have software where they are an identity, emitting information or credentials about the movement of a good. In our case today, our API absolutely supports software supply chain. We're more actively pursuing focused on physical movement of goods. But in addition to our team's open standards contribution under the contract with the NILS team, we've begun to evolve that effort to focus at places like IETF and the SCIT working groups there, focused on kind of the intersection of, they call it cyber-physical supply chain, because we think it's in everyone's best interest for some of the same technologies and standards to be able to support the full scope of both types of chains of custody and their interaction.
Okay, this is on now. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the data that gets transmuted and how you, like whether you have to do much work to ensure the reliability or the accuracy of the original documentation as it's entered into the system, and then how do you then maintain like the high level of trust in the transactions?
Absolutely. So this gets at kind of a question you and I were talking about earlier, which is not just about verifying the veracity of the information, but also interoperability. And interoperability, you've heard a lot of folks talk about at the architecture, the technology layer. For Transmute, since we launched commercially, we found that this also maps to the business layer. So meeting customers in their existing habit loops. And where this kind of intersects with your question is a lot of companies in supply chain that are managing paper, PDFs, and Excel have a data ingestion and data extraction problem. OCR is a popular solution to explore for this, but the efficacy rates aren't that great. This is a case where Transmute is actually using AI in order to basically optimize for that so that our customers can drag and drop documents, and we have models that are trained on, say, specifically the USMCA Certificate of Origin, so we have highly accurate data extraction. Now, what verifiable credentials don't do, and Transmute doesn't do today, is go boots on the ground, check and make sure that, say, a manufacturer or a customs broker is putting in truthful information. However, because we're using cryptographic signatures to sign all of these digital credentials, that customs brokerage is binding their brand identity to the self-attested claims in that credential in a way that tomorrow they can't lie if they made a human error or purposely put fraudulent information in previously. So there's kind of this natural reputation incentive built in. And then finally, because it's all interconnected, linked data or machine-readable information, you begin to be able to assess trends and patterns or reputation over time in a way that a human just can't detect.
Thank you very much, Carol.